Argentina is facing, for the first time since the 2002 crisis, twin fiscal and external deficits, a fiscal deficit and a current account deficit. So it's lacking both pesos and dollars. And part of this is due to a growing energy deficit. Argentina last year imported close to $10 billion in gas, and the deficit in the energy sector was $3 billion, and much of this essentially adds to the fiscal deficit. So one of the key drivers of the growing fiscal deficit is the energy deficit, and by moving to take over YPF, they, I think, try to at least reduce or at least put an end to this growing gap that is deteriorating fiscal balances. We have to put this in perspective. For starters, we have to bear in mind that the privatization, the sale actually, of YPF in 1999 to Repsol was to a large extent a reflection of fiscal deficit and the need to produce dollars to pay the debt service, external debt service. And it was not, since the very beginning, it was highly criticized, and it was not a good marriage since the beginning. You know, Repsol didn't have the strategic interest or incentives to invest in the country. Later on, during the post-crisis, because of these price subsidies that reduced the earnings of oil companies, in particular Repsol, these incentives were even weaker, and as a result of that, we had declining production and increased demand because of the price subsidies. Now we have probably an excess consumption of energy in our country. So the backdrop was one in which something probably needed to be done. Now the final result will depend on how this is being done. If you choose to form a professional team and you are intelligent when you choose partners to develop the reserves, this probably might have a beneficial effect, despite the fact that the short-run effect, the market effect, has been visibly negative. If, by contrast, the company falls prey to the fiscal needs that I mentioned before, then you may follow in the steps of, say, the Aerolíneas Argentinas, the national airlines that essentially has shown the growing deficits and declining production over the years. So I would say the ball now is in the government's field, and we need to see the signals that the government starts sending once the law is approved. I think there were better ways to do this. I think the political factors intervened in the way they did it. This takeover, this expropriation is highly popular. The government, because of economic concerns and some allegation of corruption, has been falling in terms of image and political support in the past few weeks or months. And I think they were tempted to have this as a big nationalistic move in order to create, a newly found support from the population. And that, of course, has a downside. The downside is that internationally, the image of the country, and particularly the market reaction and increasing financing costs, can harm investment and economic growth in the near future, in a context in which the country is increasingly in need of integration, financial integration, because, as I said, it's running an external deficit. So I would say this could have been done before in a different way, possibly much better, in a negotiated way. The upside is still there, but I think the financial downside that I mentioned before may ultimately defeat the purpose of the whole affair. Multilaterally is certainly negative. You've seen the reactions, most of them rhetoric, but regardless of whether Spain can actually impose economically important sanctions, I think the whole episode contributes to this image of Argentina following the step of Venezuela, which I think is exaggerated, but still is there if you talk with the international observers, for instance. That doesn't help, again, the performance of foreign direct investment in the country has been comparatively low relative to other Latin American countries if you look at the economic performance and size of Argentina. So in that sense, I think internationally they will pay a cost that is not necessarily economical, but over the long run it's very difficult to undo the effect that this type of moves have on the country's image. It will be fiscally positive because most likely the outcome is that the government will appropriate the dividends, the earnings of the company, the dividends of the company in the short run, and will pay the purchasing price after a long period of time because of the very likely litigation by Repsol. So in that sense, this year, next year, the net impact will be fiscally positive. That, of course, has to be netted out against the losses of foreign direct investment and the increased exchange rate pressure that you're already feeling. So in terms of economic growth, I think that ultimately may prove to be negative in the very short run. In the long run, again, it will depend on how smart they are, how efficient they are to put in value, to valorize all those reserves that they just found. I think that, again, management and professionalism and transparency now are the key concepts looking forward.